All right. Every time that music goes on, I feel like those are the longest 2 minutes of my life. But thankfully, we are now starting with the presentation. So welcome everyone to my talk, Create an API with 4 lines of code. Now, before jumping into the talk, let me give you a brief introduction about myself. So my name is Harshil Agrawal, and I'm originally from India, but I have been living in Berlin for over an year now. You're still trying to, get familiar with the European culture, and so far I really love it. I work as a developer advocate at Contentful. So Contentful is a headless content management platform. We take an API first approach, but this talk is not going to be about Contentful, so we don't have to worry about it. I am a part of various communities and I love to experiment a lot with technologies and share that stories with other people, with the community via blog posts, live streams, videos, and even giving talks at conferences like this. So today I am gonna give or share a story about how I created an API for my own use case with just 4 lines of code. Now, before we jump into the main part, I want to know how many of you know what an API is. With what an API is? Okay, I see majority of you are. I saw a couple of people didn't raise their hands, so I'm just gonna give a few sentences introduction about what basically uh, application programming interface which allows you to connect different computers together, not internet, but computer programs together. So let's just say, for example, we are trying to access Twitter right now. And if you scroll through the Twitter feed, if you tweet anything right now, behind the scenes, those APIs perform those actions for you. Now, talking about APIs, there's another key term that people sometimes get confused is webhook. Do we know the difference between webhooks and API? Anyone? Okay, only. Okay, perfect. So let's talk a bit about webhooks. So webhooks are in a way a part of an API, but they work in a different sense. So with webhooks, what typically happens is they get triggered or you make a particular call to that webhook URL only when an event occurs. Now let's go back to the Twitter example, right? For example, I sent out a tweet. So that was an event, and if I configured a webhook URL on the Twitter developers platform, it would get fired, that particular URL would get fired, and Twitter will then send all the data to that tweet or related to that event to that particular URL. So that's basically what a webhook is. I hope this gives you all an idea about what an API and what a webhook is. So let's jump into the story. It was winters. It was like Germany. In Germany, winters are kind of very dark and boring and sad and depressing. So I was just trying to cheer myself. I was on Twitter, uh, scrolling through the feeds, and that's where I came across Markdown extensible. So for the folks who don't know Markdown, it's basically the file extension that you see when you use any kind of repo on GitHub, GitLab, or maybe Bitbucket. So there's a file that says readme.md, right? So the MD is the extension for Markdown files, and Markdown is basically a Markdown language, a bit similar to HTML, but not exactly HTML. But with that, you can write your own content without using the HTML tags. So Markdown extensible is, as it says, an extensible version of Markdown. Markdown extensible allows you to have your own custom components within the Markdown files. So let's just say you have a component that would render a video and you want to have it in your Markdown files. With the typical Markdown, or the vanilla Markdown that we have, you cannot do it. But you can create your own components and then import it in the MDX files. So the MDX files work in a similar way that the Markdown files work. Coming back to the story. So I have my personal website, and it has a blog section on there. And I was earlier using Ghost CMS for that. But with Ghost CMS, I could not have my own custom components in there. So I was like, OK, I am anyways bored, and I want to try out to learn a bit about MDX. Why not do it? So I started to look into a few of things of how I can have my existing content from Ghost ported to the MDX format or the Markdown format for now. So I researched into the Ghost API, and there were two things that the API returned. The first was HTML. So all the content that I was getting from the Ghost API was in the HTML format. Now again, I don't want to use the HTML format because I want to, get the features of Markdown, and I don't want to use HTML tags in a Markdown file. That didn't make sense to me. The other format that it provided was mobile doc. So mobile doc is basically a JSON output which gives you all the information around the content. So let's just say you have the bold styling for a particular lines of code. So it would have a key value which would specify that this particular line of code or this particular line of content is bold. Again, this wasn't really helpful because it's not Markdown. So I looked on the internet, I searched almost everywhere to find for an API or a tool that I could use to convert just simply the HTML to Markdown. But it didn't help at all. I could not find anything that would solve this problem for me. I wanted to use this once. I wanted to have it for my own use case. And I was hoping someone out there would have created something similar, but they didn't. So well, I decided to create it for myself, but there was a problem. I am lazy. And I am assuming you all are lazy as well because you are here sitting in this talk to learn how to create APIs with just 4 lines of code. So you all are also trying to avoid that pain of writing hundreds of lines of code. So as I said, I am lazy and I didn't want to write hundreds of lines of code just for this one particular use case. And maybe I was not going to use this API again and again. It was, just port my blogs from the Ghost platform to MDX, right? So just going to happen once and I might not use it again. So I was not sure what or how I should approach this. And that's where I used a low-code automation platform called N10. And this is the screenshot of the workflow that I created, which basically gets the URL or the HTML content and converts it into the Markdown format. So N10, again, is a low-code automation platform, and all the things in this are basically drag and drop. The only lines of code that I had written was in the function node. So now I'm going to switch to N10 and show you the whole workflow, and maybe we'll try to run it as well. So this is the same workflow with a bit of modification, but the first thing that, of course, you need to have for an API is an endpoint to make a call, right? N10 has a native support for webhooks, so I just thought of using that. So with this particular node, basically all the square boxes in here are called nodes in N10. So I configured the webhook node over here, which would take in a URL as a body parameter. I would pass this URL to the HTTP request node, and the HTTP request node allows me to make calls to any sort of URL. So this can be an API, this can be a web page, I can even get files if I want, because with the HTTP request node, you can select what should be the response format. Now again, I want to get the HTML format, which is going to be a string format and not JSON. I can also get a file, but file didn't make a lot of sense over here, so I just selected the string format. And then once I had the HTML of the whole content that I was getting, I needed to extract only the information I want. Because again, the HTTP request node gave me everything right from the headers to the footer. And if I just want to use the content in my blog post, I basically don't want to have the header and the footer or the navigation bars and stuff like that in my article as well, right? Because again, those are going to be reusable components in my own website. So I use the HTML extract node, which would basically allow me to specify a particular CSS selector that I want to extract the information out of. So I looked at the Ghost API again. I found out that all the information over there was within the article tags. So I told N10, hey, I want to get all the information which is within the article tag. And again, I could select what kind of return value I want. Now I could have selected just text, but then it would be, it would just dump out the text that was in the article tags, which would not be useful for me because then I would be losing all the stylings that I wanted. So I selected the HTML one, HTML return value over here, and then this is where the magic happens. So if I open this code over here, let's zoom in. So this is just the 4 lines of code that is doing all the work for me, all the important work for me. So I am over here using a library that's called Node HTML Markdown. So this library basically allows you to convert HTML to Markdown, Markdown to HTML. Now the problem over here was N10 did not have a native support for this. So I had to find a way to use this library, but fortunately N10 allows you to do that. So you can import any npm package in your N10 instance, and you can use it in the function node. So this kind of allowed me to get the HTML from the previous node, convert it into the MD format, and then return it out to the URL. So let's just try it in and see how it looks. Now, because we are running, because I want to show you the output of each and every node, I'm going to select the test URL, and let's execute the workflow. And over here, let's see what we have in the body. OK, so I'm just going to quickly make a post request and hope everything works fine. It looks like it did. And if I zoom in over here, this is the whole article. And over here, this is a heading 2. And that is why we have 2 hashes before the heading. And again, this is a link as well. So that's why we also have the markdown format for linking internal pages or the internal links. Now, this is the response that I got in the webhook node. So over here, I get the headers. I get the parameters if I'm passing anything in the parameters field. If I'm passing any kind of queries, I can get the queries as well. And then there is the body where I'm passing the URL. Now, if I open the HTTP request node, you can see it gives me the whole HTML, starting from the HTML tag to everything that the page returns. And then again, as I mentioned, I didn't want everything that I got from the previous node. I just wanted the content of that article. That's why the HTML extract node helped me, and it just now only returns the content of that particular article. And then the function node basically returns all the content. It converts it into Markdown format. And then I can simply just use this in my own blog. So this was the first API that I created. I kind of enjoyed this process, and I found it to be really useful. I thought of, I already have this working, and it's useful. Why not try to simply use it for plain HTML content? Maybe there might be a use case where someone just wants to pass on the HTML content that they already have, and they don't want to pass in the URL. And that's where I added another webhook node. And this one takes the HTML, the raw HTML, from the request. And because now that we have the raw HTML that we want to convert, I don't need the HTTP request node and neither the HTML extract node. All I had to do was use the function node, update the parameters over here. So if you see over here, it says body.html because now that's what we are getting from the previous node. And then it would simply return me the markdown format for that. All right, so this is what my Docker compose file looks like for my own N10 instance. The main thing that I want to highlight over here is the environment variable, which allows you to use those external npm packages in N10 itself. Now, there's one important thing. You cannot directly go ahead and just add those environment variables and just tell like, hey, this is the package that I want to use. You would have to install that package in your N10 instance. And then you would also have to create a Docker image and then use it for your own use case. once I had this up and running, I did a small Twitter poll to see if people would be interested in using this. And from this, I could say that 80% of the folks were interested in doing this. Only 11%, I don't know why, wanted to do it manually. Maybe they are not as lazy as us. Uh, but this gave me an idea of trying to make it public and allow people to use it and get an early feedback from them and see how I can scale it and if even I can scale this. Surprisingly, I could not scale it. I shared it with a couple of my close friends. They started making, I don't know, thousands of requests a day and were kind of breaking my servers a lot. And that's where I learned about adding rate limits to this API. Now, because of the constraint of time, I am not going to get into it. But if you want to learn about how to add rate limits to such kind of APIs, I gave a talk at a Redis monthly meetup where you can just learn about how I did it using Redis. So you can hop on to that link and you can find the talk over there. Now I had the API up and running. I had my content ported to MDX. What's next? This kind of gave me more confidence, and I was more curious to see how I can improve my own blog. And I wanted to do something more creative, and that's where I learned about open graph images. If you have worked a bit closely with the marketing team, you might have heard about open graph images, or if you have even tried yourself to learn about meta tags or SEOs in websites, you might have come across open graph images. So they are basically those beautiful images with a description, a title, and sometimes the URL as well that you would see for a particular link that whenever you share, you would basically get this kind of thing. And I wanted to have it for my own blog. Now again, there was a problem. I could either go in Photoshop or Canva or tool like that and create it manually for each and every article, or I could create an API that could do that for me. And you might have guessed it by now that I am lazy and I did the second approach. I created an API for myself that I could use it whenever I have a new article out there. So at this point of time, I had the API up and running, but I wanted to take it a step forward. I didn't want to use it in the function node. I wanted to have my own custom node in it in itself. And that's where I created a custom node, which is based on PageRes. Again, that is an NPM package. So in PageRes, you can enter the URL. You can also mention the resolution. And the output gives you basically the screenshot of that website. So that's what I did with the PageRes node, and I open sourced the node so that anyone else who is interested in some kind of similar use case can do that. Under the hood, PageRes uses Puppeteer, so it would start kind of an instance of Puppeteer, take a screenshot of that page, and then return it to you. Let's see if we can quickly do a demo for that. All right. So over here, I have the workflow which does that for me. I have, again, a webhook node. And this time, I am passing the title of my blog in the query parameters. It's basically a GET request. And then the PageRes node over here is taking in the title that is coming in from the previous node. And this particular URL is my web page that I created. So it's basically the template that I use for my website. If I quickly show you, it's an empty canvas that PageRes uses to create the website. So let's try to run this as well and see how it works. So again, I'm not going to run it in production. I'm going to run the test URL so that we can see the output in here. All right, OK. We already have this coming. I'm going to execute this node, and I'm going to send a request. Now with this, it would take a couple of minutes, as I mentioned earlier, because it's running Puppeteer under the hood. So we see now we have this title created, and it's basically an image that it sends out as a response. All right. So those were the two APIs that I created for my internal use case, but I'm gonna quickly try to demonstrate how easy and quick it is to create an API for your own use case. But for this, again, I already came up with an idea that I want to present over here. So let's try to do that. So as I mentioned, I am working with Contentful now. So I recently joined Contentful and I am still learning about it. Uh, but one thing that I did with my website is I ported all my projects that I showcase on my website to Contentful so that I can easily manage this. So this is the content model for the projects that I have. So all my projects have a title, they have a description. To make it look pretty, I have a preview image, a link, and a launch date. Now, the launch date is basically for my internal use case. What I want to do next is improve my GitHub README and have my projects listed in there. Now I can either again write hundreds of lines of code to manage this, or I can just do it via init, and that's what we are gonna do now. Okay. Now all this content is already in Contentful. I have a couple of projects that I have already added in Contentful. So for this, I am gonna go ahead and select the Contentful node. And I'm gonna select the delivery API. Now there are two different APIs, not important for this talk, but with the preview API, you can get all the data that is in preview, that is in the draft mode. I already have configured my credentials, so I'm gonna use those. And I want to get all the entries from there. And I'm gonna also mention the content type. So this is gonna be project. And now if I execute this node, it's gonna give me all this information coming in from Contentful, right? So I got the title, I got the description, I got the preview image, I got the link, and I got the launch date. Now, to add it on my GitHub README, I don't want to, make it a huge file where people would read this. So all I want is over here is the GitHub, basically the title and the link. So for this, now I want my API to return just the title and the link. And for that, I am going to use the set node, which allows me to basically configure what all information I want to set and can be used in the previous node. I can also configure all the other variables that I want in this particular node. So all this information is going to be string. I'm going to select the value from the previous node. And this is again the title. So down below, we can see the result, and up above over here is the expression. Now I can also write some JavaScript to modify this. So some default JavaScript functions like the replace function I can use over here to replace some words that I want. I can also have some static content over here. So I will have dynamic content plus that static content with all the outputs that I get. All right, we got the title, and the next thing I want is the link. So I'm going to quickly add the link as well. Again, this is coming in from the previous node, so I have to select and specify what that particular link is. And here the link is present, and if I now execute this node, we can see that there is now only title and the link. This is working fine, but again, we don't have an endpoint where we can, get this information from. It's just in my init instance right now. So for this, I am going to add a webhook node. I can, in the webhook node, add any kind of authentication. So if you are creating an API which you want to share with other folks, you can add an authentication so only authenticated people can use this. You can also, again, configure what kind of HTTP method you want. You can configure the path as well. So I can call this code Europe. And over here, you would see it says code Europe. And the next is, I don't want to send a response when I call this API immediately. I want to send the information that I created in the last node. So I'm going to say when the last node finishes. And once I have the webhook node, I'm going to connect it to my Contentful node and then the set node. Now, because I have added a webhook node, I need to save the workflow so that n8n registers this webhook. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to try out again the test URL. So let's try this out. All right, so down below you can see that we have now the information that we got from the last node here. But for some reason, we only got the first value, right? We didn't got all 5 values. So let's try to change that. So instead of first entry JSON, I'm going to select all entries. I'm going to save this again, and I'm going to execute the workflow. And now over here, you can see that I got all the entries for my workflow. So one of the use cases, or one of the ways to improve this that I want to do is configure a webhook in Contentful itself so that whenever I create a new project entry in Contentful, this workflow runs automatically. It gets this data, and it appends the data in my GitHub README file automatically. Now, this is just, again, one small use case for my own personal use, but there are a lot of things that you can do and a lot of things the community is using this for. Let's talk about what else you can build. Well, you can create an API for any kind of database, or even for Google Sheets or Airtable. So if you have clients coming in, who love Airtable or who love using spreadsheets, and they want to still have an API which is kind of easy to use, you can use n8n to do that. You can also create internal APIs. I am currently working on a project where I have to do a lot of manual work, and I am in the process of transitioning this into automation again so that I don't have to do that again, because it involves getting information from the website and adding it to spreadsheet, which does not make a lot of sense doing it manually while I can automate that. So that's another use case. You can create registration flow, and I really love this idea. So one of the community members at n8n presented this at a community meetup where they created a registration flow for a newsletter. So as a user, you go to that particular URL, you submit your information, your name and your email address. Behind the scenes, a workflow gets executed, and it sends you an email with a unique verification link. Only when you click on that unique verification link, you get registered in the database. And once you have the information of that user, you can then send out the newsletter to them. You can also create bots. A lot of community members are using n8n to create bots, and I think Telegram node is one of the popular nodes in there. And I also have created a couple of bots. I've created bots for my Twitter account. I've created bots for Discord. I also created a couple of bots for Slack as well, because again, I'm not coding now. I'm just dragging and dropping stuff using the flow diagrams and simply just translating my logic into the diagrams over there. So it makes it easy for me to create these bots quickly. You can automate your DevOps processes as well. Back in October last year, during Hacktoberfest, I created a couple of workflows which would help open source maintainers to manage their open source projects, because during Hacktoberfest, maintainers get a lot of contributions coming in from the community, and becomes a bit overwhelming for them. So automation can be used in such places as well. And lastly, you can go crazy like me and create something like GitHub Wrap. So GitHub Wrap is a project I created last year in early December. Something like similar to Spotify Wrap. GitHub Wrap gives you your yearly contribution, or your contribution you made in 2021. So stuff like the pull requests you have created, the number of issues you have opened, the commits you have made, and all those things. Now, all this was built using n8n, Cloudinary, and Cloudflare. I've also written a blog post about it. You can, if you are interested in learning about it, you can go onto the blog on my blog and read about it. So what are the takeaways and why I am talking about this? The first thing is we are all lazy. And I am proud of being lazy because that's where my creativity comes into picture. That's where I start creating innovative solutions and try to find out new ways of approaching to problems. So we are lazy, and we should not think about it as a negative sign. I would say take it as a positive way and try to find solutions that are easy not just for you but for your team as well. And the other thing is, while creating all these projects, I learned one important lesson. That is to build, launch, and iterate. I was very much fixated to, have that perfect product out there, so I wouldn't release or launch it and showcase to the folks out there, which was which was a terrible idea. So that's what I did again with GitHub Res as well. I created the project, I shared it on Twitter, and to my surprise, I was getting 60,000 requests per day. I was scared, to be honest, but that was a really good learning for me because I learned that, okay, even if you have a project which you think is incomplete, just go out there and launch it because you're going to get really good feedback from the community, and then you can always work on adding that feature that you wanted to. All right, that's all I have for today. And thank you all for joining in. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, it works. So I wonder, what are your thoughts on managing complexity when it comes to like change control or collaboration in such architecture?
Yeah. Aniden did release user management, but it's still in a very early phase. But if I talk about managing workflows or the complexities of workflows, uh, one really cool thing I found around Aniden is they have a node that's called execute workflow node, right? So let's just say you have a workflow which has thousands of nodes in there. What you can do is, and you are kind of reusing a couple of steps again and again. For example, the open graph image workflow that I showed, right? I might be using it again and again for different use cases. So what I can do is I can have that workflow in there, but I can create a sub workflow, and I can call that a sub workflow whenever I want to, reuse that particular workflow. So there is a concept of reusability within the internet itself. Perfect. Any other question? Awesome. So thank you everyone for attending this talk, and I hope you are now proud of being lazy as I am, and you learned something new today. And if you have any questions, just feel free to hit me up on Twitter, or I am over here throughout the day. Thank you. I am over here throughout the day, and you can also read a couple of blog articles that I wrote around automation and N10 on my website. And one seamless plug I want to do is Contentful is also hiring. So if you want to talk about Contentful or getting a job at Contentful, feel free to reach out as well. Awesome. Thank you so much.